That's how odious he found it. But this idea that the American Republic, the American constitutional form of government, is the greatest force for good in the Western world only makes sense if the guarantees in the Constitution are real guarantees, and if the people that we elect to the government really believe this. When I was on the bench and lawyers would come before me from the government, whether they were prosecutors in criminal cases or whether it was a civil case where somebody sued the government because a policeman ran them over or they fell on the sidewalk, I can't remember the government asking me to enforce the Constitution. The government asks judges to avoid and evade the Constitution because the government hates freedom. Freedom is an obstacle to the government's acquisition of power, and that's all the government wants. I look around this room and I see so many bright and happy faces that are happy that we are part of this crusade. In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its maximum hour of danger. You are that generation. This is that hour. Now is that time. Whenever you deal with the government, take your cell phone and make sure it has a camera, because the camera is the new gun. The same government that fears freedom fears the disinfectant of the light of day, and that's what the camera does to them. Occasionally, there are some of my former colleagues who wear black robes who have done the right thing. When the Bush administration said we can take people to Cuba because we don't have to obey the Constitution or the treaties or the laws, we can torture them, and best of all, we don't have to worry about those pesky federal judges, the Supreme Court, by a vote of 8-1, said you can't. When the Congress enacted legislation that said if the president declares you an enemy combatant, you don't have the right to habeas corpus, meaning you can't force the government to come before a neutral judge and justify its unlawful confinement of you, and the Supreme Court, by a vote of 5-4, said you can't. When the president said he could lock up Americans and throw away the key because they were too dangerous to talk to their parents, their spouses, their lawyers, or other prisoners, that he could keep them in jail for as long as he wanted without even charging them with a crime, by a vote of 6-3, the Supreme Court said, you can't. In fact, every single time that people took the Bush administration to the Supreme Court over its so-called war on terror, the government lost and freedom won. I remember having a debate with one of my more irritable colleagues, and he said to me, what is your problem with this Patriot Act, and what's your problem with Gitmo? And I looked at him and I said, you know, you like all this stuff. Bush was president at the time. You like all this stuff because you trust the president. What happens when these powers are passed on to a president that you don't trust? And he looked at me and he said, well, when I am sent to Gitmo, will you come to visit me? And I said, Bill, no. Thomas More, one of my heroes, my personal patron saint, the patron saint of lawyers, was arguing in his own behalf in his own trial, which we all know he lost, for treason. The act of treason, the alleged act of treason, was the refusal to agree that the king is the head of the church on earth. That was the act of treason. And Moore, in presenting his closing argument to the jury, said to them, "Some men say the earth is flat, and some men say it is round. But if it is flat, can the king's command make it round? And if it is round, can a law of Parliament make it flat?" He was, of course, appealing to the common sense of his jurors. He was also appealing to their understanding of the natural law, that our rights are ours by virtue of our humanity, that God has given order to certain events in the world, and there are things that the government can't change. And if our rights come from our humanity, then no law, no proclamation, no executive order, no command, no piece of legislation that no one has read but the printer who put it on paper can take those rights away. In World War I, Woodrow Wilson and the progressives arrested people that they called anarchists. They were mostly Eastern European Jews from Boston to Baltimore who spoke against the war. And they enacted legislation, which is still good law today, called the Espionage Act of 1917, which makes it a crime to speak against the government's war effort. When the New York Times, of which I'm not particularly fond, nevertheless revealed that the government was spying on people without warrants, something that the Attorney General under oath a year before had denied that they were doing, he threatened them. He threatened to prosecute them under the Espionage Act. Imagine that. The government was going to prosecute some newspaper for speaking the truth on the basis of a 1917 law written in an era of hysteria against Eastern European Jews. FDR locked up 150,000 Japanese Americans, and in New Jersey, 10,000 Italian Americans, not because they did or said anything, but because they belonged to a racial or ethnic group that he feared might not be loyal. They were as American as he was. In fact, they were more American than he was. And of course, we know that Abraham Lincoln slaughtered 600,000 Americans. His troops raped women, robbed banks, destroyed courthouses, burnt towns, and they all got away with it. All in the name of big government, of order, of safety. I hear the devil coming from around a tree. And the devil stopped to talk to me. And the devil said, "Give me your liberty, and I'll keep you safe." Don't ever let anyone make that diabolic bargain in your behalf. There is one fear that is a good fear. And Jefferson reminded us of it. When the people fear the government, that is tyranny. When the government fears the people, that is liberty. God bless you.